A boy is born outside Milan to a tailor and his wife. The family has no money and no connections to the sport that will consume him. 30 years later, his name will be on the bicycle that wins more races than any other frame in history. Ernesto Colnago did not inherit a workshop. He did not study engineering. At 13, he left school and walked into a bicycle repair shop. He was given a broom. He swept floors. He watched. He had no plan except to be near bicycles, which was the only place he felt the world made sense. By 17, he was racing, not watching. Racing. He was good enough to compete at the amateur level, fast enough to understand what a bicycle needed to do under real pressure, and attentive enough to notice what existing frames could not give him. Most riders accepted the equipment they were handed. Colnago studied it the way his father studied fabric, looking for where the construction was wrong, where the material was fighting the person using it. In 1951, he crashed, a bad one. His racing career ended before it had fully begun. Most people in that position walk away from the sport entirely. Colnago walked towards it differently. If he could not race, he would build. He opened his own workshop in 1954. The space was small. The equipment was basic. The ambition was not. What he understood and what separated him from every other frame builder of that era was that a racing bicycle is not a vehicle. It is a system. Every tube, every joint, every millimetre of geometry is either working for the rider or against them. There is no neutral. The builders who came before him had treated the frame as a container for components. Colnago treated it as the primary instrument. He began working with riders rather than for them. He would watch a racer on a long climb, then go back to the workshop and change the geometry. Not guess, change, test, change again. The process was closer to tailoring than manufacturing, which may be exactly why he understood it instinctively. His father had built garments around bodies. Colnago built frames around riders. The results started arriving in the 1960s. Riders on Colnago frames began winning races they had no business winning on the equipment they had ridden before. Word moved through the professional circuit, the way it always moves, quietly, between riders and team directors, in hotel lobbies before stage starts. The frames were different. Something about the way they held a line under pressure. Something about the stiffness under a full sprint. Nobody had the precise language to describe it, but every rider who rode one felt it immediately. Eddie Merckx came to the workshop. He did not come because Colnago had the best marketing. He came because other riders had told him the frames were worth the trip. Merckx was not a man who wasted trips. What followed was one of the most consequential partnerships in the history of the sport. Merckx was, at that point, already the greatest cyclist alive. He had won the Tour de France 3 consecutive times. He had won every major race on the calendar. He had won in weather conditions that forced other riders off their bikes entirely. He did not need Colnago. He chose Colnago. The distinction mattered. Together, they went to Mexico. The target was the hour record, the measurement of how far a single rider can travel on a bicycle in 60 minutes on a track. It is the purest test in cycling. No drafting, no tactics, no teammates, just a rider, a machine, and a clock. The record at the time stood at 49.408 kilometers, set 2 years earlier. On October 25th, 1972, Merckx rode a Colnago frame at altitude in Mexico City and covered 49.431 kilometers in 60 minutes. The record fell by 23 meters. 23 meters in 60 minutes at the absolute limit of human capacity. The margin was almost nothing. The precision required to find that margin was everything. The frame Colnago built for that attempt weighed 5.75 kilograms. Every weld had been done by hand. Every tube angle had been calculated for the specific geometry of one man's body at maximum sustained effort. It was, in the most literal sense, a custom garment built for one purpose and one person. That record stood for 12 years. The decades that followed were a sustained demonstration of what the small workshop had become. The 1973 World Championship. Race wins across every major stage race, and one-day classic on the calendar through the late 1970s and into the 1980s. Frame after frame, season after season, a disproportionate share of the results in professional cycling traced back to tubes welded in that same facility by the same hands. In 1985, Colnago introduced the Master, a frame built with star-shaped tubing, a cross-section design that had never been used in production bicycle manufacturing before. The shape increased stiffness without adding weight. It was a structural solution arrived at through years of workshop experimentation, not through a university research program. Colnago had no engineers on staff in the academic sense. He had craftsmen who had built thousands of frames and knew where each one had failed. The Master became the standard against which every other road frame was measured for the next decade. The sport changed around him. Carbon fibre arrived. Computer-aided design arrived. Wind tunnels arrived. Colnago adopted each technology in sequence, but always on his own terms, always filtering it through the same fundamental question he had been asking since 1954. What does the rider need, and how close can the frame get to giving it to them perfectly? In 1994, Miguel Indurain set a new hour record on a Colnago. The machine had changed. Carbon construction, aerodynamic tubing, an entirely different era of materials. The question being asked was identical to the one from Mexico City in 1972. Ernesto Colnago is still alive. He is in his 90s. He still goes to the workshop. The tailor's son never stopped fitting the material to the body. He simply changed what the material was made of. If this story belongs in your feed, the algorithm needs your help to find it.